Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. 6 o'clock, so I'll make a start. And first of all, I'd like to welcome Duncan Chittenden, who is our new independent member. Several of us have already had a chat to him, and I'm sure as we go along, you'll appreciate his contributions. So welcome to the Cheltenham Borough Council Audit, Compliance Governance Committee, being held today, Wednesday, the 9th of July. My name is Councillor Adrian Bamford, and I'm the chair of the committee. This meeting is being recorded by the council for the live broadcast on its YouTube channel. If there are any breaks in transmission to the YouTube stream, the meeting will be adjourned for a short period until the issues are resolved. Can I ask everyone to speak clearly when addressing the meeting, and that officers introduce themselves when they speak? The first item is apologies. Are there any? No apologies. Good. The next item is declarations of interest. Has anybody got any interest to declare in any of these three items? No, good. So, minutes of the previous meeting, held on the 28th of May. We've made a couple of typographical amendments on page 4 and 5, but they're minor. And if anybody's got any other comments, I will sign them off as a true record of the last meeting. Could I have a show of hands to confirm that, please? Thank you very much. I will put there's 5 of us. Obviously Duncan couldn't because he's not wasn't at the last meeting. Right, so we'll quickly proceed on to item 4, which is the annual audit opinion for 24-25, and I'll ask Lucy to introduce the item. Fire away.
Thank you, Chair. Evening, members. The report you've got tonight, as the Chair's alluded to, is the internal audit opinion for 24-25. This is a summary of all the work that we've conducted throughout the year, and we have to submit an opinion to the council, which then feeds into your annual governance statement, which subsequently then feeds into your annual statement of accounts. I think the key page really for you to look at as a committee is page 18, which gives you a sort of real overview of the work that's been done, where the good points and where the bad points have been during the year, the number of audits we've undertaken and their assurance opinions, the number of those that we've done, the number of agreed actions, and you can see that there were 26 agreed actions this year, but the council have already implemented 9 of those, which is pretty good, to be fair, compared to some of my other councils. We've undertaken 26 pieces of work this year, which is the same as the 23-24 year as well, and we found good controls and practices in accounts payable and your revenues and benefits service when we undertook the audits in those areas. So overall, we've given the council a reasonable assurance on the controls and their frameworks that are in place. So it's pretty good. There's further information within the report, but as I said, this is a summary of everything that you've seen as a committee throughout the year, and this just pulls this all together. And since the last meeting of this committee, we've concluded one final report, and that's attached in your pack as well. So happy to answer any questions, Chair.
Yeah, I'm going to start with a slightly cheeky question. I'm glad to see you've given us a reasonable report, but I was a little disappointed it was a low reasonable, given the indeed where you've pointed that arrow on page 18, and the fact that 5 reports were in the substantial category, 2 in the reasonable, only 2 in the limited. To be on the bottom end of the reasonable seemed a bit harsh to me, but I'm sure you'll have a reason for that.
It's actually sat in mid, Chair. It's in the middle of the dial. But no, I think for the purpose of this report, ignore the arrow. It is reasonable. There's no high, medium or low for your opinion. It is reasonable. Page 18, as you say.
Sorry. Yeah, so later on in the report, you use the phrase low reasonable, unless I've misread or misremembered.
It may be on some individual audits, but not for your overall opinion.
So overall, what is your? Are you just categorising us as reasonable and not giving us span? Okay, Well, that's helpful, I think. I'm comfortable with that. Because we do need to use that phrase elsewhere later on in one of Victoria's. Yeah, good. Right, okay, thank you for that. I'll open to the floor. Any questions for Lucy? Chris, go ahead, Councillor Day.
Thank you. Yeah, I've got, I guess, 3 questions, I think. So I notice in terms of the agreed item actions coming out of identify weaknesses, there are more priority 1 and priority 2 in 24-25 than there were in 23-24. And I just wondered if you could comment on that, if that's significant or not. The other thing is, I think at the last meeting, and it's in the minutes, you said you'd give us, perhaps at this meeting, a full update on the voids process with more information on the agreed actions. And I just wondered if there is an update on that. And then the third is really a request, which is I see in the document on page 24 that the CFO receives a list of agreed actions monthly. And I just wondered if it would be possible to have that copied to the members of the committee as well, because I think, you know, that's a document I would be very interested in, because I think, you know, those actions I think are really important. And sorry, I've just thought of a 4th one, which is the open items. So there are 4 agreed actions from 23-24 that remain open and 15 from 24-25 that remain open. And I suppose it's particularly those 23-24 items, because in the past, I've kind of been on both sides of the fence. You know, for full disclosure, I worked as an external auditor and then went into industry. And I know from that background that in many organisations where I worked, closing actions was a massive priority. You know, in fact, once I got a job on the basis of that, to make sure those were closed in a timely manner. And what we used to do, if the permanent fix was a long-term piece of work, we would have to put in an adequate short-term fix that would then be replaced by the long-term fix. So technically, we would close the action very quickly and then put in a even better control kind of later on. And so I just really wonder why we still have 4 agreed actions still open from 23-24. So thanks, and I can recap because there's quite a lot there.
Your first 2 points I will take together, but I think I'll come back to those. The agreed actions do come to this meeting on a quarterly basis. That's the usual Annex B that you get, but I would defer to you two as to whether you're happy for them to be issued on a more regular basis.
No, we did. So we discussed these not 6 weeks, 5 weeks ago, didn't we? Yeah. So I suppose my thought on that was, is that the status as at the 31st of March, or is it current status that? Well, I don't know. It's a question. I'm not sure which it is.
Those are current state. That's current status.
Okay.
What you've got in front of you today.
Oh, in that case, I think it is. You should. No.
But my question is, would you, as Paul and Chair, would you like all audit committee members to see the agreed actions every month? The list. Do you want me to email them a list out every month, or is quarterly sufficient? That was the request.
From my perspective, quarterly is sufficient. I'm perfectly happy for Chris to receive that as well if that's helpful for him. Unless that is a significant operational burden, and obviously if you are emailing Councillor Day, if you can copy me, and that'd be great. But if that creates operational problems, though, do let me know.
it's not so much operational program, it's just the cycle of events. So this particular meeting is sort of circulated around some internal officer meetings. So we have a corporate governance meeting, and we have a leadership team. So those actions come to us first, and therefore, if we have an audit committee and if we can see any outstanding actions, then various officers like myself or Victoria will chase those officers. So my only concern in you receiving it monthly is you might not actually see any movement on those, because it's normally that sort of quarterly cycle.
In that case, I think then quarterly is fine, because by the sounds of it, more frequency might just create confusion purely over timing of meetings. So no, let's stick to quarterly.
Respond to the other point.
Lovely, thank you for that. To respond to your 23-24 agreed actions, the 4 that remain open, there are 2 that were for grant income, and the follow-up audit has just been conducted on that, and we're just about to issue the draft report. What we've found on some of those agreed actions is that part has been completed and part hasn't been completed. But what we're going to do is similar to what you used to do. We're going to close off the old agreed action, but open the new agreed action with the bit that remains open. So we're going to supersede the old one. But there are 2 grant ones, which say we've just done a follow-up audit for those. So that report will come to the next committee anyway, so you'll see that soon. The other 2, there is one in respect of, it was an old CBH audit, so that's James Donovan Court service charges. And the date on that, the timescale on that was the 31st of May, but we're still waiting for some more evidence to be able to close that audit. And the last one is an ICT one to do with business continuity plans. So we need to follow that up with public or ICT. And that meeting's happening tomorrow.
Well, thanks very much for that. I guess just to be in my mind, so with those grants then, if the action that was put in place hasn't covered off the weakness or the risk, then it hasn't been resolved. So I think then, rather than closing it and having a new one, it just remains open, but please, put in place a proper mitigating control or procedure. So in my mind, those are definitely still unresolved. But I totally take your point on it. Just some has been done, but not the whole job. Thanks.
I was just going to say the one on that was the James Donovan Court one. I believe that policy has actually been written and it's just currently being reviewed. So I anticipate that element of the action will be closed imminently.
And to respond to your first 2 points, your observation is correct. There are more priority 1s and 2s this year, and they came out of the voids process audit that you saw at the last committee. So that links nicely to your other point, in that we have spoken to Matt Ward now, who has been tasked with looking at the voids process and what's happening, and he's had to go back to the very beginning, but our auditor is going to go back and have another chat with him next month to see how he's progressing. But he's hoping to have created a great big spreadsheet that has the voids and where they are at the moment. That data isn't available to him.
Sorry, I mean, just for me, we've only got 1 year with another. It would be useful, perhaps, maybe, to have considered previous years as well, to see if it's a worrying trend. So perhaps just a verbal update on that at the next meeting, if there is apparently some worsening trend in that regard. I mean, on the face of it, the numbers are pretty small, so it could just be a statistical quirk, if you like. And of course, we did actually go through all of those at the time during the year and discuss whether we were comfortable or able to offer a critique on each of those audits and what the path forward should be. Anyway, over to you, Chris.
So just for my information, so that voids process is still the process, the operational process, the day-to-day work is still kind of in the same place as when you did your original audit and found all those issues.
Yes, but they've appointed a different person to look after that process. So he's pulling it all together. It's what he's inherited. He's now pulling together and putting right.
So we will discuss further in October when we get the next report. And hopefully this new person will have taken things forward. If that's all we've got on this item and I see no other hands, I think I ought to record my thanks to the accounts payable team for such an excellent result of the audit. If you can pass that on for us, Paul, that'd be grateful. Right, so the next item is one of Victoria's. It's the annual report on the information requests.
Wonderful, thank you, Chair. So, yeah, you'll see that you've received the annual report on information requests that Cheltenham Borough Council receive. So we're responsible for ensuring that we meet our legal requirements under the Freedom of Information Act and the Environmental Information Regulations. So this report details the Council's handling of information requests during the year of 24-25. The number of information requests has reduced since the previous year, but there is still an upwards trend from 2020. The Council has responded to 87.8% of requests within the statutory 20 working day deadline. I will just note that on 5.1 there is a rogue number that is a typo. So the number of requests received within the year were 847, not 4.8. I don't know where that 4 came from. I apologise. It will be amended and re-uploaded. So really we're just asking for you to consider the progress report and to make any comments on the content as necessary, and I'm happy to take any questions.
Yes, I got very miserable with Claire and Victoria at my briefing with them to say, what on earth are all these 4,847 requests? And yes, it is indeed, it's 4 point, because it was 4 comma. Anyway, as a random 4, we concluded. Any other points about this report? No? In that case, Duncan, yes, over to you.
Could I just ask, maybe I've missed it in some, is there a process for, because with FOI requests you can refuse them if they're going to take too long or various other things. Are you comfortable with the process that's rigorous enough to resist FOI requests which are going to take too long, and how does that work?
So I would say that I think it's an element that we could probably improve upon. I think that we do use exemptions as and when necessary, and we have refused some requests. You'll see that we've said where we refused it in the previous year. I actually looked for the most recent quarter, and I think we'd refused 9 in either full or part. I think that potentially there are some where we could push back on, perhaps where they're not actually asking for recorded information, and actually sometimes they're asking questions, which is not actually under FOI, because FOI, as you may know, asks for recorded information. So I think there are cases where we can push back more on that. I've just appointed a governance and assurance officer who will be assisting with the FOIs. And I feel that will support us in perhaps being a little bit more rigorous in pushing back that in that process. We already have an information governance officer, but they also deal with a number of other things at more of a strategic level. So probably to answer your question, no, at this time I don't think that we're right where we should be, but I think that we use exemptions where appropriate, and I think we can improve.
Thanks, Victoria. We also noted yesterday that there was a big spike in these EIR requests. I think there was, I forgot what the reason was now, but anyway, the good news is that was a spike. and that it is now coming down again, and the number, as you can see, in last year was more normal. Councillor Willingham.
Thanks, Chair. I was just looking at the requests to try and look at the ones where the percentage on time is quite poor. And the only obvious one that sticks out is clean and green, where we're only achieving 40, so most of them are late. And one of them seems to have been late by 100 and just shy of 100 days late, if I've read the response correctly. I mean, some of them, building control managed to get one twice, but they've only had two. Only one of them was met, so that's a bit of a sort of statistical anomaly. But what's going on with clean and green that they're not getting the huge number of requests compared to the sort of multiple service areas and planning, and yet they're really sort of not hitting the target? Is there something that we need to get the council to do to get this up, or do we need to get the information put on the website so that people can just be told, we've already published it, go look there?
Yeah,
I'm just a bit, I think that one stands out as an outlier that we probably should at least pay attention to.
yeah, it does. Thanks very much for raising that. I think you're right about building control. There's not a lot you can say. One of two. And most of the rest of the department, or all of the rest of the departments, the percentage figure seems, on the whole, pretty reasonable. And that does stand out like a sore thumb. So I'll let Victoria go through our discussion yesterday about it.
Yeah, so I think largely we did discuss that I believe that the offices within that area tend to be out and about, which I think can make it as a business area sometimes a trickier one to perhaps respond to within the deadline. Unfortunately, as I wasn't here during the full year of 24-25, I wouldn't necessarily be able to comment on fully as to how we've tracked that. But what I will say is that my Beth, who's currently on maternity leave, had been setting up a process for quarterly reporting, and the information governance officer that I mentioned earlier will be taking that up and reporting on a quarterly basis. So I would like to say that going forward, we're going to be monitoring this a lot closer, and that we'll be able to pick it up with managers in sort of quicker time, which I think probably would probably, I hope, resolve an element of what you've mentioned there. I'd also say that we have implemented a slightly new process. So within the new software that we're using, their officers are sent automated 10-day and 15-day reminders. But subsequent to that, if they don't respond to that, then the officers send them a personalised email to say, can we assist further? Is there any problem with this FOI, for example? If they don't respond to that, then it gets escalated further. And if they don't, then I would either take it on myself and escalate it even higher than that. So we have implemented processes there a little bit. I think that potentially the 114 in terms of the max response time could be an anomaly, and that may be one case, but I note that your point that there are 12 out of the 27 that weren't responded to. I'll have another look at it, but it could be as well that some of them were a few days out, and I haven't necessarily put that detail exactly in the report, but I'm happy to take that on board for the next year's report. Is that all right?
Thanks. Yeah. So
Just coming back, the other question I've got is, do you have anything, you might not have any data on this, just thinking about it, but do you have any data where people have decided to try and FOI councillors, noting that we're not public authorities, and if someone sends me an FOI, they're likely to get told, as a councillor, I'm not a public authority, talk to the council itself, or where the information's not held, because obviously we are not public authorities, and some people think they can FOI us when they can't. Is there anything on that in there? Because obviously there are people that just don't get how FOI, the limits on it.
I mean, Victoria probably won't know that. It's interesting to note, though. I personally have never. I can see other councillors shaking their heads. So if it's only a sample of 5, I know, but I don't suppose you've had any experience of that either.
I'm not
guessing.
aware of any specifically. What it might be, however, is sometimes that the elements of an FOI could be about internal communications, of which potentially your internal communications may well be included. But obviously, where that is the case, that would be appropriately reviewed. And if it wasn't appropriate to share that, we'd make sure that we're complying with the FOI Act and also with GDPR and anything. We always make sure that we're corresponding with the two and not sharing anything inappropriately. But I'm not aware, and it's not something we document. Again, under our new system with our new software, we're actually able to push back on FOIs that aren't information we hold. We do get quite a lot, for example, that are for county, and we have a really simple process now of it's literally a click of 2 buttons to be able to say, this isn't for us, but here's where you need to go to get the information. Should that occur, we would probably decline that and say that's not information that we would hold, or it's not appropriate under FOI.
Great, thanks. So, Juliet, if we could just record that it is an action in the minutes to check that the Clean Green team are upping their game a little, shall we say? I'm sure you can think of a good phrase. Thanks. Any other questions on Victoria's report? Excellent. In that case, we can move on to the next item, which is the annual governance statement and the local code. My thought yesterday was it's almost the wrong way round, in that you need to do the local code and then assess the governance statement, against the local code. But actually, as Claire pointed out, that the local code, this is the new local code. So this time last year we had the local code, and this is the governance statement assessed against that local code, and this is the new local code. So I'll let Victoria introduce, but just to give that bit of context. Okay.
Thank you. So the council again is responsible for ensuring that its business is conducted in accordance with the law and proper standards. So this includes the statutory duty to prepare an annual governance statement as part of the statement of accounts. In preparing the annual governance statement, the council has to assess itself against the local code of corporate governance. So essentially, what we've got here is the recommendations are to approve the draft for 2024-25 of the annual governance statement and to approve the 2025 local code of corporate governance. There are limited amendments as our discussion. It is Claire that has written this report. I'm here on her behalf, but I'm more than happy to take any questions and then, of course, look for you to approve.
So if anybody's spotted the typo. Anyway, there is one and it's been sorted out, so don't worry about it. So, I looked at page 57, which is page 2 of this report, and it feels like a very extensive list to me. So, I don't really have anything to add to that, but so anything you'd like to raise here with respect to this annual statement, and it's now, if you like, our compliance with the local code that we set. Councillor Winningham.
I'm just going to flag something about safeguarding. So from my experience, both sides of the chair, I have a feeling that we need to work to up everybody's understanding of safeguarding in a multi-agency safeguarding sort of regime. There are things where what might be considered where third parties have submitted quite naive safeguarding comments. They've not been challenged by Children's Services on the County Council, and whether that's because they haven't had the time and the bandwidth to read them or what have you. And we haven't really pushed back particularly hard against third parties in terms of safeguarding. And the types of things I'm thinking about where you could make third parties do things like safeguarding training as part of their conditions for getting licenses is the general one. But if you don't understand safeguarding in terms of protecting children and vulnerable adults from both criminal exploitation and sexual exploitation, then if something goes wrong, no one's going to come out of it looking favourably. And I think that's just a comment that if you have to be so careful with this, and it's really about getting that partnership working, but also the understanding. I don't want to go into the specifics too much, just because of some of the safeguarding things are probably what's the word? They are exempt matters, and some of them relate to commercial entities who I don't want to name. So, but I think there are some issues that we need to look at about safeguarding and just how that works in a multi-agency situation, and it applies across the board. You know, you've got licensing, you've got Cheltenham, what was Cheltenham Borough Homes. So there are a lot of places where we are one of the cogs in a situation that can protect vulnerable people and vulnerable children if we do it right, and can let them down if we don't.
So is this essentially services that we are procuring from third parties, or more generally? Okay, permitting and or procuring, perhaps. And I suppose then the question is, what powers do we have? Well, I suppose if we're procuring, we've got every power. We could insist upon it. Is that true for licensing as well?
So licensing, you could put policy. Fortunately, there is a licensing policy review scheduled, statutory review, and I just think it's one of these things of we need to learn what's gone wrong elsewhere, and do the best we can for safeguarding, but also challenge our partners, which is mainly Gloucestershire County Council, the police, etc., to do their bit as well. And I think at the moment everybody is stretched, and but it's one of those things where if we get it wrong, it's going to look badly on everybody.
Victoria, do you want to comment on the measures that you?
Probably only to say that you've mentioned that there's a licensing policy review, and there's obviously within the key areas of focus for 24-25, there's reviewing an implementation of a new safeguarding policy. So it'd probably just be I'm contributing to that, but I'm more than happy to take the comment away and discuss it with Claire.
That'd be a really good idea. Paul, on procurement lists, is there anything that we've done in that regard, or
Not to my knowledge. No, I think we'll have to take this one away.
yeah? Okay. It's not
about procurement. It's about just our policies rather than anything else of our interactions with others. I don't think it's the services we buy. In that sense, it's the policies for. So, as an example, we're looking at it because reading it, so we're looking at the housing services, and safeguarding in there is really, really important. We've taken the safeguarding for license. So I think just adding something about, making sure that we also look at safeguarding through licensing. With the obvious ones are taxi drivers, private hire drivers, private hire operators, and certain premises such as late night refreshment, where we currently, in terms of late night refreshment, our policy is a little bit, well, I would say our policy is not where it could be. And in terms of taxis, it's more about getting a good data sharing agreement with the county council and the police to make sure that information that is pertinent to safeguarding matters is shared in a timely and transparent way with the committee, even if it's not shared with the public.
Okay, so really the action for this committee is to note the outcome of this policy review and comment on whether we're comfortable with it. I think that's okay, Judy, to note that in some way. Okay, thanks. So that's the annual governance statement. Anything on the local code, the proposed local code? Duncan?
Mine's a general one about it, really, about what the communication strategy is for it. So 2 points, really. One, for me, it would be helpful if we're going to have something like this, which is then going to get communicated and is clearly very important, to have an extra page which says what the communication strategy is would be helpful. And it might be, we're just going to stick it on the website, but obviously if that's been thought through in that way. And then particularly with this one, I looked earlier at I was flicking around the website and I looked at the corporate plan. And then there's a little video thing about the corporate plan, which I'm sure costs money. I appreciate that. But which is a sort of 5-point little video thing, which really explains it really easily and is quite helpful and simple. For most people, if you put that out, I'm not sure how many hits we're going to get on the website, if you know what I mean. And I think that's the risks in that are, I think it's important that as a normal citizen here, it's encouraging to me that we're as concerned about doing things properly in the council. And I think that's something which we should promote. And then there are various parts about it, and I'm not sure what they are particularly, which are, you might want to pick out, you might want to say this is the overall thing, but here are 5 things every resident should know about. It might be safeguarding's one of them, for example. Do you know what I mean? So it feels to me as though there's a bit we need to know a bit more about.
I think we're volunteering to do a video for you. What are your thoughts on that?
Wonderful. I think that's one that I'm going to have to take away and discuss with Claire as the author. But I take on board your point and absolutely discuss it. I think, being transparent and communicating well with the public is something that aligns with much of the other work that we're trying to do. So absolutely take that on board and discuss that.
Excellent. Okay, thanks. That's a very useful point, Duncan. I do think the more we can actually make it something that's pertinent and accessible, the better. So, any other comments on the local code? Excellent. Okie dokie. In that case, I will move us on to the proposed agenda for the 22nd of October. And if you can bring your camp beds, I think it could be what I can report, which is good news. We are virtually there on our annual report. We've got all the information we need. Judith is putting it in a Cheltenham Borough Council suitable format rather than an Adrian Bamford Word document, and we'll present. We can present that to the next meeting. I don't think we won't need to debate it particularly long. Well, anyway, so that will be available. Then that's one item, and it should be fairly quick to deal with. But there are an awful lot of other ones. I don't know what the thoughts are of Lucy, Victoria, and Paul on any of that, or whether we just stick with it as it is and see how it pans out. Any thoughts, guys?
Nothing at the moment.
Actually, a lot of it's external audit. I've only just spotted that. We haven't really got anybody here to comment on that, have we? But actually, looking at them, they're not actually necessarily items or hugely to layers, are they? Shall we stick with this as it is then?
I think so.
Yeah, excellent. Okie dokie, that's that. I think we're there. Let me just check my script. Any other item the chairman determines to be urgent? Yes, the urgency is getting back to the car somehow. Yes. Right, and we'll meet again on the 22nd of October. Thanks very much, everybody.